A tax on a tax, it's something that could only make sense to a government, a bureaucrat. It doesn't make sense to the average person. I don't care what political persuasion you are. You can be far right, you can be far left. This is the type of thing that annoys all Canadians coast to coast, paying a tax on a tax. It's something we already do for most of us when it comes to gasoline. We've got a provincial excise tax in most provinces on gasoline. We've got the federal excise tax. And then after those are factored in, we've got the HST or the federal GST on top of our provincial and federal excise taxes. It makes no sense. Why are we paying tax on a tax already? Well, it's about to get worse if you live in Canada's most populous province. Kathleen Wynne of the Ontario Liberal government is promising to bring in a carbon tax. It may be cap and trade, it may be a direct carbon tax, but either way, the effect will be the same, and the HST is going to go on top of that. That's a recent revelation that should have every Ontario resident hopping mad. It's prompting us here at The Rebel to dust off our nocarbontax.ca petition. We invite you to sign it, nocarbontax.ca. But to try and make some sense of this, I want to bring in Christine Van Gyn. She's the Ontario Director of the Canadian Taxpayers Federation. And Christine, does the idea of a tax on a tax make sense in your world? Because it certainly doesn't make sense in mine.
Well, it doesn't make sense to me or to most consumers, but of course it makes sense if you understand Kathleen Wynne's cap and trade carbon tax plan as a plan to just squeeze more revenue out of Ontario families. If you understand that her poorly formulated scheme that's going to have zero impact on global emissions but will increase the cost of just about everything, if you understand the goal of that is to maximize revenue for Kathleen Wynne's government coffers, well, of course she's going to apply the HST on top of the carbon tax because it means more money for her government to spend on whatever they wish.
It also means more money for the federal government. They're going to take 5% of that tax on the tax. Kathleen Wynne will take 8% of that tax on the tax. So it's a win-win for Liberals all around in terms of getting more money out of our pockets. But however that price on carbon is determined, there's an extra 13% on top of that.
Yeah, and we already paid twice at the pumps in tax. We already pay, as you mentioned, HST on top of the excise taxes. It's something that costs the Ontario consumers and Canadians across the country a lot of money in double taxation. So then to add the HST on top of this new carbon tax, which will apply to gasoline, drive the price up at the pumps even further. And fuel is something that people depend on to live their daily lives. This isn't some abstract thing that isn't going to have an impact on people's lives. People rely on their cars to get to work, to drive their kids to soccer practice. It's a basic necessity of life. Same goes for home heating fuels. The HST is going to be applied on top of the carbon tax as it's applied to your home heating bill if you use natural gas.
Let me just stay with the price at the pump for a moment here. I believe the provincial excise tax is about 14 cents per liter. Is that about right?
About 14 cents? I can tell you that the price at the pumps, about 34 to 36% of the price you pay is all towards the combined tax rate.
But it's about 15 cents per liter for provincial excise tax, 10 cents a liter for federal excise tax. Then there's the HST on top of that. So if gas is down at $1 a liter, it's around the range we've been paying in Ottawa lately, then about 5 cents a liter is the tax on the tax. Now we're going to add the carbon price on top of the excise tax of the federal and provincial government, and then HST on top of that. We're going to be paying about 10 cents a liter is going to be my guess, just on taxes. And that's only for the fuel that we use to drive our cars, drive the trucks that deliver goods. This really will drive up the price of everything, both on the carbon price side, but also on the tax on the tax.
And Brian, it doesn't have to be this way. I'm not a proponent of the carbon taxes in other provinces like British Columbia or in Quebec. But in British Columbia, the HST is rebated back to consumers. So they don't actually pay a tax on tax there, even though it's applied. It gets rebated by the province. And in addition to that, the carbon tax is listed as a separate line item on people's bills. So for their home heating fuels, they see that they are having a carbon tax being charged and the HST being charged and then rebated on top of that. So in Ontario, the government could have applied for an exemption through CRA. They could have created their own rebate to return money to the consumers, but they've elected not to do that. They've elected to collect that extra HST on top and just squeeze that out of Canadians, out of Ontarians, who really, we haven't seen income growth in this province in a long time. We see job growth is sluggish. And it's, people are suffering in this province with high electricity bills. And now we learn that the premier is thinking maybe she's going to phase out natural gas. And if she doesn't, she's going to apply HST on top of a carbon tax. So making natural gas, one of the few affordable commodities in this province, more unaffordable. It's a government that's very out of touch with the reality of the lives of citizens in this province.
Well, I heat my home with natural gas. I can tell you it is something that, unlike hydroelectricity, unlike the electrical bill that we get, the price of natural gas has either gone down or stayed stable over the last decade. There were all these claims that it was going to go up. It didn't. The free market, to the extent that we have a free market in that commodity in the province of Ontario, worked far better than it did for the electrical bill, which has only gone up. This is a government-controlled entity, and they always find ways to increase the price year after year. And this is another one. And I like your point that they had a choice. They had a choice not to apply the HST onto this price on carbon. They decided they wanted the extra 8% of the HST in Ontario being 13%. 8% of that 13% goes to the province. The feds only take 5%. They decided they wanted it. The feds are kind of a side beneficiary of this. It was the province's choice, wasn't it?
Yeah, of course, it's totally up to the province of Ontario. She could have either rebated the money or asked for an exemption. But in what world was Kathleen Wynne not squeeze as much money out of people as she can? And there's a huge problem with the lack of transparency. If this wasn't about revenue, the premier would have no problem telling us that separating the carbon tax as a separate line item, about being honest with people about what this carbon tax is going to cost them. But it's really just about maximizing revenue for this government. I can tell you with the out-of-control electricity prices in Ontario as a result of the government's irrational policies, the government with this carbon tax is trying to do to your natural gas bills what they did to your electricity bills. And it's a real shame because people can't afford it in Ontario. It's
going to lead to energy poverty, which is something we've seen in European countries that have pursued some of the same green energy plans, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. The reason that electricity is so unaffordable is because of the government's top-down control of the market, and with their interventionist plans to possibly even phase out natural gas in Ontario. It's going to be absolutely devastating in a cold climate like Canada, where people depend on natural gas to heat their homes. We have no option but to heat our homes, or we'll freeze.
Well, maybe we can all just install solar panels on our rooftops and get rebates from the government, and maybe that's what she wants. Maybe that's the goal. Christine?
Oh, yeah. I'd love one of those 20-year contracts being paid 3 times the market rate. That sounds like a pretty good deal if you can get it.
Yeah.
But unfortunately, it's the taxpaying public that has to pay for those terrible deals.
And most of us can't get those deals, and we do need something that's reliable in the dark days of winter to heat our homes, and I'm not going to rely on solar. I don't know about you.
Yeah, I mean, solar is not, it doesn't have to be unaffordable, but the way the government has run the policy in Ontario, it is unaffordable. Other jurisdictions have managed to run solar electricity that isn't so badly mismanaged, or is it produced at such expensive rates. But the thing is, we don't actually need that production in Ontario. In terms of electricity, we have a surplus of power, largely as a result of these contracts made under the Green Energy Act. We have so much extra energy, electricity, that we export it at a loss of over $1 billion last year to the United States and other jurisdictions. So with the carbon tax, the government's going to be doing to your home heating and to your fuel what they did to your electricity bills, and I'm frankly terrified to see what that's going to look like.
So am I. Christine, thanks for the time.
Thank you so much for having me.
Christine Van Geyen is the Ontario Director at the Canadian Taxpayers Federation. If you're fed up with Kathleen Wynne's plans, make sure you sign our petition, nocarbontax.ca, nocarbontax.ca. Maybe we'll try and work on getting some of those nifty lawn signs out to you as well. Drop us a line, brian@therebel.media, if you'd like one of those.
Thanks for watching. Click here to never miss a Rebel update. Want even more of The Rebel? Well, click here to become a premium member.